You pour your heart into every single fundraising appeal. You juggle a dozen different tools trying to piece together a clear picture of your supporters. But what if your fundraising platform was built with a deep understanding of those challenges? That's the difference a purpose-built giving platform like Bloomerang can make. Bloomerang customers aren't just fundraising. They are seeing a 27% larger one-time gifts than the industry average. They're growing their supporter base by an average of 12% year over year. And that's the confidence to know who to ask and when. It's the joy of seeing your community rally behind you with greater generosity. It's turning passion into unstoppable momentum. Your purpose is limitless, and your fundraising tools should be too. Learn how you can start raising more at jcsocialmarketing.com/Bloomerang. That's jcsocialmarketing.com/BLOOMERANG. All right, on to the show. Hello, and welcome to Nonprofit Nation. I'm your host, Julia Campbell, and I'm going to sit down with nonprofit industry experts, fundraisers, marketers, and everyone in between to get real and discuss what it takes to build that movement that you've been dreaming of. I created the Nonprofit Nation podcast to share practical wisdom and strategies to help you confidently find your voice, definitively grow your audience, and effectively build your movement. If you're a nonprofit newbie or an experienced professional who's looking to get more visibility, reach more people, and create even more impact, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nonprofit Nation. This is your host, Julia Campbell. Today, we're going to talk about fundraising, more specifically, how to be fundable and findable. My guest today is Kevin L. Brown. He is CEO of Mighty Ally and the author of Fundable and Findable, the brand new way to fix your nonprofit fundraising. Kevin believes most nonprofits are stuck in the wrong cycle, constantly doing more fundraising instead of fixing their fundability and visibility. He writes daily on LinkedIn and Substack and just released his first book. And he has 3 daughters from Uganda and China that fuel his work to end poverty and injustice. So we're going to explore why only 1 in 1,000 nonprofits ever scale, what makes a nonprofit actually attractive to funders, the Fundable and Findable Framework, and lots of other fun topics. So Kevin, welcome to Nonprofit Nation.
Hey, thanks, Julia. Happy to be here.
So let's talk about how you got into nonprofit work and the kind of work that you're doing right now.
Yeah, so my background, and actually all 4 founding partners of Mighty Ally, all of us came out of the private sector. We cut our teeth and spent our first decade or so building brands ranging from Apple to Formula One and fintech startups, and learned quickly that brand and communications and positioning and messaging and all the things that you just do in the private sector to raise more money was not used as much in the nonprofit world. And so through my daughters and living in Uganda and growing our family in Uganda, we started to see that many nonprofit leaders just weren't taking advantage of some of these same skills and disciplines. And so that was a little bit of the light bulb moment for starting Mighty Ally, was how do we take this best practice that exists and has been proven for decades in other sectors, and how do we bring it to the nonprofit world? So
your book argues that more fundraising won't fix your fundraising. I work in digital marketing and digital fundraising. Yeah. So I completely agree. Quantity does not fix quality, and quantity is not the answer to everything. People tend to think that in social media work, in any kind of communications work, but I think it's so true. So more fundraising won't fix your fundraising. Can you sort of unpack what you mean by that?
Yeah, it's certainly provocative. And, it's funny, I'll do these talks at fundraising conferences and do a keynote. And I'll say very quickly, this is not a competition between brand and fundraising. They're inseparable. And I'll always talk about, it's not about the order of importance, it's about the order of operations. And so really, I think the statement is really just trying to shake us out of our status quo, right? I mean, think about nonprofits have been around for centuries. We've been fundraising for decades, and something is not working, right? Yeah. So I say in the book, and we focus on this premise in our work at Mighty Ally, that too many nonprofits are unseen, unheard, and underfunded. The data shows that only 1 in 1,000 will grow beyond a small business. And so it's really this stark reality that many nonprofit leaders, in fact, most nonprofit leaders are fighting 2 levels of inequality. First, the injustices faced by their communities. And then second, the unjust reality that their own organizations are stuck in the nonprofit starvation cycle. And so I argue that something's not working. We're not growing. We're not raising enough money despite, trillions of dollars being out there in donor advised funds and in foundations. And so if something's not working, let's do something differently, right? It's like that old definition of banging your head against the wall and expecting a different outcome. So that's the whole premise, is like just doing more of what's not working will not get us there. And I think that's what our sector is stuck in, is this fundraising chase, donor outreach, grant applications, prospect lists, more, but it's not working. So stop. Yeah. Let's do something different.
Okay. And the framework in the book, the Fundable Findable Framework, well, you do frame the solution to this as becoming fundable and findable. I'm going to see if I can say those correctly without
you nailed it.
them up for the whole podcast. But I want to talk about the 4 pieces of the framework, if you would be so kind. So can we sort of dive in, review the 4 pieces, and then maybe dive a little bit deeper into each of the pieces of the framework?
Yeah, totally. So being fundable, I like to say, is showing donors why you exist, what you do, who will do it, where you're going, how to get there, and when it will be done. Yes. So those elements are your theory of change and your strategic plan. And that really precedes any sort of marketing, communications, or positioning. And so being findable is all about occupying a distinct space in the minds of your funders, and then you routinely communicate that promise to them. And that's all about, to your point, Julia, visibility. But again, that comes second. Really focusing on being fundable comes first. And so that's the formula, be fundable, be findable, and then that hopefully helps you get funding. And at that point, then you do all the traditional fundraising stuff, the donor outreach, the grant applications, the prospect lists. But until you're fundable and findable, the fundraising will just be a chase.
Let's talk about theory of change, because I know that a lot of organizations really struggle with a theory of change.
Yep.
So this is sort of the need, which is the problem, like people serve, the reason for being, the work, and then the results. Now, I worked in domestic violence for a very long time. I have, organizations that work with foster care, kids in foster care, or, working to end sex trafficking. So the outputs can be a little fuzzy, or the theory of change can be a little fuzzy, because obviously this one organization in, when I used to live in Virginia, is not going to end domestic violence all on its own.
Sure.
So how do you help organizations get into this mindset that they can create this theory of change? And this is sort of what funders want to see.
Yeah, so I think instinctively, most of us as nonprofit leaders know the problem we're solving, and we instinctively know what we're doing in our work. And I think we instinctively know the outcomes that we're trying to create, the impact. But the big nuance here, and the reason that a theory of change is so important, is you have to get it out of your head and show donors. And that's, the number one complaint we hear from donors is they just don't understand what you do. And that's that core of your theory of change. Your mission sits at the center of your theory of change. And so the value of a theory of change is you're getting it out of your head and you're getting it on paper. The problem, the reason for being, the mission, the vision, all of those elements. And then that becomes your future communications. I mean, that literally, you take pieces from that theory of change and use it for your elevator pitch. You take wording from that theory of change and use it for your website. Like, it is the core of your brand. It is the core of your fundraising. And what I often say is that unless you're a social enterprise that has like a product, maybe you're a coffee social enterprise and you're selling a product, maybe that helps you make money. But those are rare, more rare than nonprofits. So if you're a nonprofit and if you don't have a product you're selling, your theory of change is your product. That is what you're selling to donors. And so that theory of change, it's a document, it's a tool, it's a process, and it just becomes so valuable for brand building and fundraising.
Exactly. Oh, wow. I think that's so important. It's just so challenging for so many organizations, because it's almost like the Simon Sinek, find your why. We know a lot about what we do.
Yep.
We know a lot about how we do it, but intrinsically we know why, but it's so hard to articulate that why you exist. And that's really what speaks to the heart of donors. And that's really what's going to pull their heartstrings and continue to get them to participate. The other pieces of the framework, it's getting programmatic clarity over what you do. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think many of us have so many needs in our communities. We see that, the populations we serve and work with just have so much that we want to do for them and that maybe they're even asking for. And so I think that leads to mission drift. And many of us as nonprofits just do so many things that when it comes to raising money and telling a clear donor story, it just becomes convoluted. So there's a little tool that we use around your mission and your interventions, and those should be pretty focused, pretty tight. And then you can name all the partners that are involved in your work. And those are other organizations, maybe government partners, et cetera. And, by listing all that in your theory of change, it not only gives you programmatic clarity to sell the story, but often that theory of change is what you use internally to even better refine and optimize your programs. And so it becomes the tool you use to measure your programs. That's why that programmatic clarity in the theory of change, it just does wonders for your impact and measurement, your donor awareness. I mean, there's just so much that stems from that clarity that you get in that process.
Absolutely. And it's so important. I think once donors and funders want to go that next level with you, then they really want to understand the programs and the services and the nuances. Yeah. But until you sort of attract them with your why, they're not going to care. If they don't care about your why, or they don't believe in your why, or it's not of interest to them, or it's not a passion of theirs, then they won't dive deeper to figure out sort of what you do. A third part is organizational clarity, like who you are, who leads your work. Can you talk about that piece?
Yeah, and in terms of leaders, the leadership team. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting.
Who's involved in the work.
Yeah. I mean,
on all sides, I think.
I think that's an important discussion point when we talk about brand, because we often just think of brand as being the organization, the company, et cetera. But at the end of the day, donors are people that fund people. And we often say your leaders are your greatest brand ambassadors. Your leaders are your best fundraisers even. There's a line in the book that I steal from Nonprofit World, and they refer to your CEO as the chief earning officer. And they have this funny quote where they say that most CEOs would rather get a root canal than to, go call on a wealthy prospect, but it's part and parcel of your job. And so, I think that, there's organizational clarity, but then very quickly, most donors want to see who's behind the work, especially institutional funders. Maybe an individual donor doesn't care as much. Maybe if they're giving $15 online, they maybe don't need to know the leadership team, but if a grant maker is coming to give you 150,000 or 15 million, whatever the math is, they really need to see the team behind it. And that's actually the second part of being fundable, is that whole strategic plan. Who is pulling off the work? It's one thing to name what you do in the theory of change. It's another thing to name who is doing it and how it will be done.
I love that. It's just such a simple, easy to understand framework, because you've got the overarching pieces of how to be fundable. And then under that, there's the theory of change and the strategic plan. And then you have how to be findable, which is so much more of a passion of mine, but we'll stay on fundable for a little bit. So what are sort of some characteristics of a nonprofit that, lacks that fundable quality? Like, I don't want to say they're not fundable, but what are, maybe there's theory of change, there's strategic plan. What is sort of like the first step they can take to become more fundable in this world?
Yeah, I think the number one sign that you have a problem with being fundable is that you get plenty of donor meetings, you get plenty of website impressions, you have plenty of grant application opportunities, right? You have plenty of at-bats, like let's use an American baseball term here. You have plenty of at-bats, but you don't convert. People are confused. Donors walk out of meetings not really feeling the clarity and the love. And so if you have plenty of at-bats and you're just not raising enough money, that's probably a fundability challenge. That means that there's some confusion in there. Like there's something about your story, your theory of change that's just not sticking and resonating.
Yeah.
So I think that's the hallmark of being fundable. And oftentimes people think, well, we just need more donor meetings. We just need more prospect lists. But at the end of the day, if you're not converting on what you already have, then it's time to take a step back and be more fundable first.
Yes. Okay. You're right. Because I do also think that is something organizations, when they're starting out, they don't work enough on the theory of change and the strategic plan, but they set up their Facebook page right away, or they set up their websites because they want to be findable. But of course, if people are finding you, but they're not finding anything of substance, then they're going to turn away. So we tend to sort of reverse it and not do it in the correct order. How do you think nonprofits should be pivoting maybe their fundable strategies in light of the turmoil and everything just going on with the administration and in this political climate, in this time of unbelievable change and stress?
Yeah, what I hate to see is that nonprofits are digging into their own theory of change and their own reason for being and their own missions, and they're changing that, which, of course, the political pressure, you can't deny. But at the end of the day, your theory of change really has nothing to do with funders or donors. It has nothing to do with who's president. Like, why you exist and the problem you see in your community and the work you do and the vision that you want to accomplish, that's something you do inside the four walls of your organization. And that really shouldn't swing based on who's president and where the funding goes. All that said, due to funding shifts, due to administrations, due to, a lot of different factors, that's where kind of being findable and your positioning strategy and what words do you use at the outside world, which donors do you go after, that can maybe be a little more nuanced depending on the state of affairs. But at the end of the day, that theory of change should remain firm regardless, because otherwise I think we're not being true to ourselves. Like if we really care about climate justice and then we're going and we're removing that term from our theory of change, I think that's the wrong way to do it. And I mean, of course, it's hard to sometimes stand up to the powers that be, but at the end of the day, the theory of change should remain firm regardless of what's happening in the outside world.
1,000% agree. 1,000%. So let's shift to becoming or being more findable. This involves positioning strategy, as you write in the book, and marketing communications. But let's start with positioning strategy. How can we position ourselves better in a crazy, noisy, distracted, cluttered world?
That's exactly it, Julia. It's like, I think the estimates say 10 million nonprofits in the world. And I think many of us feel like it's just really hard to break through. So the two biggest pieces of positioning, I would say, are number one, figuring out what makes you unique, right? So I say in the book, and I say in some of my keynote speeches, this idea that different beats better. I think all of us say, well, we're better, or, we do programs better than this other organization. And I think there's an old quote that I don't even know where it comes from, but they say, maybe Jerry Garcia, in fact, from the Grateful Dead, he once said, don't be the best, be the only. And there's the idea that if you can really break through the noise and be the only nonprofit that is thought of for doing the work that you do and the way that you do it and the way you talk about it, like, that's so valuable. So that's the first part of being findable, is figuring out what makes you unique. And then also, which donors are you targeting? Even if you don't do brand communications and have social media and campaigns and whatnot, like, that's a big step towards getting findable and funded, is just being unique and knowing who you're targeting.
Wow. I could not agree more with what you just said. Don't be the best, be the only. Yep. It's not enough to say we've been in the community for 60 years and we are the oldest and most respected and trusted institution in the area. Younger generations especially, they're not impressed by that. And that's not what's going to compel them to volunteer or to give. Don't be the best, be the only. I just taught a course on podcasting, and that was exactly what I was trying to say. Like, don't worry if there's other podcasts on this topic or if there's other people interviewing a similar kind of person, but just be you. Like, what are you uniquely bringing to this equation? What is your secret sauce? Like, why would someone choose to listen to your podcast over something else? And a lot of times it is that positioning, like, what makes you unique in the marketplace. Totally. So I love that. Seth Godin talks a lot about that. And my listeners know I'm a huge fan of Seth Godin. That's really difficult. Are there any activities or any questions that we should be asking in order to truly drill down to our unique value proposition?
Yeah, I mean, it's so simple, but one of the greatest tools that we use with our clients, and it's in the book, is just a grid where you literally line up other organizations across the top. And some people don't like the word competitors, but you do have competition even in the nonprofit world. If you don't like that word, call them peer organizations, call them comparables, whatever you call them. Line up a bunch of organizations across the top, like use a whiteboard, use an Excel grid, whatever you want to do. And then down the left-hand side, just list all the different attributes that maybe you think you're being compared against. So for instance, you might be, working just within your community with the elderly population. And like maybe another attribute is, history. You've been around for a long time. Maybe another attribute is whatever, you do this unique program, like list all those attributes down the left. Yeah. And then just go out and look and see who else is either saying the same stuff or kind of appears to be emulating these attributes. And then just make an X where this organization does these things and make a half X if they kind of do, kind of don't. And then leave it blank if the other organizations can or, can't say this. And then you would do it for your organization on the right. But that's all it is compare organizations versus attributes. What's really cool about doing that exercise is you'll start to see a lot of noise, like, wow, everyone's saying this thing. And then you'll see gaps like, wow, this is a really open space where people aren't talking about it. And that helps you figure out not only what makes you unique, but what are the areas of uniqueness that others aren't claiming. It's so eye-opening. I think as social entrepreneurs, we're so used to having our heads down in our communities and our products and our programs. And we do this in our workshops with clients and they kind of lift their heads up and they say, wow, everyone else is saying the same thing we are, right?
Yeah.
They're just not used to looking around at the outside world.
So the second piece of the Findable framework, marketing communications, that's my favorite. Of course, that's what I do. It's what I love. This is how we get the word out. This is how we attract people. It's how we spread the message. What is the difference? And we talked about this a little bit before recording, between brand and branding. And where do nonprofits get all of this mixed up?
So within marketing communications, which is a big bucket, right? That is
a
massive
huge bucket.
Field of work. Within Marcom, there is website strategy and social media and messaging and storytelling and PR, right? There's so much. And then what many people call branding, I would say fits within marketing communications. My definition, and I think many definitions would say that branding is often the visual representation of your brand. So it's your logo, your fonts, your photography, things like that. Branding, though, is typically just that final extension of your brand and how it looks, and brand is everything we've already been discussing. Brand is your theory of change, your strategic plan, your Marcom, your positioning. Brand is how it makes people feel. There's so much that's intangible about brand. And so I think that's also one thing that gets in the way of nonprofit leaders doing this work is they hear about brand and they say, oh, well, we already have a logo. We don't need to do any brand work. Just having a logo is not brand, that's branding. And there's just such a big difference. It's critical, of course, how you look matters for what you say. And of course, branding, having great branding is great, but that's just one little fraction of having a bold brand.
Exactly. It's also one of the first things that a nonprofit thinks they should do when they first incorporate. They're like, oh, we have to get a logo. We're getting it all sort of backwards. I think your theory of change informs your branding almost. Yeah. So are you a bright orange and fiery red? Like, are those going to be your colors? But maybe your organization wants to instill calm and peace and relaxation. And I just think that all of it sort of informs sort of like a cycle that goes back and forth like a circle. So a question I wanted to ask about the role of the founder and CEO in becoming fundable and findable, because it's very important, I think, and I know you think this too, that this goes beyond just sort of a task on a to-do list. So, any CEOs, EDs, board members out there that you're listening to this and you're saying, oh, I got to get this book for my development director, my Marcom director, and we're going to check it off the to-do list. It just seems like something that needs to be more embedded more deeply in the organization. So what's your advice for those people listening?
Yeah. I think if you're an executive director or a nonprofit CEO or a founder or a board member, you own the brand.
Yes.
And it's worth repeating, you own the brand. It's not a comms function. This is not a 21-year-old, straight out of university that does some social media to go do some brand work. And it's also not the fundraising team's job. Fundraising is a skill. That is a discipline. That is an art. And it's not their job to own the brand either. And so I think anyone that's thinking about going through a brand journey with our clients, like when we do consulting engagements, we require leadership involvement. And in fact, if we get an inquiry and a first call and it just looks like the comms team trying to do some comms work and some branding work, we actually tell them, hey, this is not a good fit for us. We're going to go really deep here. We're going to dig into your identity. We're going to dig into your strategy, your soul. I mean, that really is what brand is, right? It's almost like a human. Yes, a human has like the clothes you wear and the way you talk and everything, the outside, but humans are so deep that, can you imagine, kind of all the different aspects of your internal organization that you would just give over to like a young person or an external consultant. And so that's the hallmark of a good brand is leadership, ownership. The board owns it. Everyone it has a role in building a brand and maintaining it over time.
What are some of your favorite strategies around visibility? Because I think for people listening, a lot of them are saying, and this is something I hear all the time, oh, I know, we're the best kept secret. No one, people have not heard of us. I went to the grocery store and I was talking to someone and they'd never heard of our organization, and we've been in the community for so long. So what are some of your favorite tips around getting more visibility?
Well, funny enough, my answer is a little bit counterintuitive. What we find with our clients, so by the way, we work with growth stage nonprofits and early stage nonprofits. So these are typically organizations at a few $1 million per year in revenue. We're a nonprofit ourselves. And so we don't work with the big international NGOs like, Save the Children that are, at hundreds of millions in size. The organizations we work with, and the data shows, in fact, in the United States, 88% of nonprofits struggle on less than 500,000 a year in size. Wow. And so most nonprofits are small. And for that reason, the biggest thing we say for visibility is you can't do it all. You probably don't have a comms team. And if you do, it's probably one person or two people. And if you're a small nonprofit, the best way we have found to be more visible is to really focus. So pick maybe a primary channel, the thing you really focus on most. Maybe it's social media, maybe it's podcasting, maybe it's PR, maybe it's speeches, whatever it is. Pick that primary channel and then have a secondary channel to back it up. And then really optimize your website. Like that can do wonders, right? Yeah. Like having a couple of key channels, having a good pitch deck, having an email newsletter and a website. Like, geez, you can raise millions of dollars with that. But I think the challenge is many of us try to just do everything, right? We have this multi-channel comms plan, and we just get stretched so thin that none of it really breaks through the noise.
I know, analysis paralysis. I know that you advise funders as well. So what are you seeing on the other side of the table? How are funders sort of shifting in what they look for and how they make decisions?
Yeah, it's a great question, Julia. It's funny. I think a lot of our work does focus on nonprofits, but then we do try to fight some of the power imbalances that exist between funders and nonprofits. Specifically, a lot of our clients are grant-making foundations as well. And so I think there is certainly an element to, this power imbalance that has existed for so long in our sector, and making sure that we're not only working on storytelling as nonprofits, but that funders are working on story hearing, right? Especially
story hearing. I love that.
Yeah. Right. It's a two-way street, right? Especially, when it comes to, communities that have been historically oppressed or marginalized, BIPOC leaders or, the indigenous leaders from around the world, right? I think those are some of our nonprofit leaders that just haven't been heard as much in the past. And so, I think the funders are hopefully starting to come around to one big trend that I'm seeing and comes down to story hearing, is that those closest to the problems often have the best solutions. And so I think that's a big thing that we fight for in our work is, community-led organizations, some of these smaller nonprofits, they're living and breathing the problem itself, often should be the ones that are funded most, not just the big international NGOs that have the flashiest campaigns. So I think that's one of the big trends we're seeing and that we're pushing for.
What would you say to sort of a very small nonprofit? You said 88% of nonprofits are budgets of $500,000 or less annually. That's not surprising to me, but that's crazy. Where would a very stretched thin development director, marketing director, at one point I was a development director, marketing director, and volunteer coordinator all at once at a job. Where would you advise them to start today? If they're really engaged, they're embracing this, they read the book, or they're going to get the book, they're very excited about becoming more fundable and findable. What is one step they could take to potentially bring these ideas to the board or the CEO and incorporate this into their work?
Well, I mean, first things first, it's a brand is not built overnight, right? They say Rome wasn't built in a day. It's like there was an old parable that talks about like, how do you eat an elephant? It's like one bite at a time. I think that's the big piece about brand building is, you have to just build on it. There's a great quote by the impact investor, Jacqueline Novogratz. She says, just start and let the work teach you. And I love that because it speaks to, brand building is this iterative process where you get going and then you get good. And so I say in the book, as you work to become fundable and findable, you're not supposed to start with a perfect brand or have all the time in the world. It's really more like a science where you're experimenting and iterating and optimizing over time. But, to answer your question more specifically, Julia, I would say if you want to just do two things, there are two exercises that I love. I've shared these on LinkedIn. They've gone viral a couple of times. The first is called the one sentence theory of change. You can Google it. It's in the book, but you can find it for free on LinkedIn. And that is just this one sentence that encapsulates the whole thing into literally one line. And that line is, because why? Why do you exist? We work where? That's kind of the geographic boundaries. To help who? Those are the people you serve. What? That's what you do. How? Those are the programs. In order to when? So it's literally just why, where, who, what, how, and when. Put those things together and you have a one sentence theory of change. You don't need to go through a big process. That's kind of one tool you can use. So that's being fundable. On being findable, there's this one sentence marketing strategy. Similarly,
oh, I love it.
Take all the plans and save those for later. And for now, just get on one sentence. Unlike competitors. So that's the first part, what makes you unique. We are unlike competitors. I'm sorry, that's kind of like the competitors that you listed or the organizations. We are three uniques. So that's kind of where you list those uniques.
I'm writing this down for myself.
Okay. Nice. I'll share it in the show notes. And then we reach, and that's the main audience that you're targeting, via two channels in order to one goal. So that's it. Your competitors, your three uniques, your main audience, your two channels, and your goal. And that one sentence, honestly, is more of a marketing strategy than most nonprofits have today. But just having that clarity around like, oh yeah, here are our competitors. Here's what makes us unique. Here's who we're trying to reach. Here's how we're reaching them. And here's why we're reaching them. You do that one sentence theory of change and the one sentence marketing strategy, and you're making progress.
I missed the last part of this. So it's unlike, and then you list out some of your competitors or collaborators, some people similar to you.
Totally.
We are, and then you list three unique things about you.
Yep.
We reach, talk about your target audience via, pick two channels.
Yep.
Like in order to, is that the last part?
In order to, and that's one goal. So for instance, I'll give you,
I love it.
So the one goal could be, raise awareness. It could be online donations, whatever it is. What are you trying to accomplish with your Marcom in the first place?
Exactly. Oh, fantastic. And everything can kind of be whittled down from there. I love it. That's
totally
fantastic.
It's like I probably stole some inspiration from this when I created it, but you see these like positioning statement, fill in the blank ad libs. And so I kind of wanted one that created a little bit of positioning and a little bit of Marcom just in one sentence. And that's half the challenge. Again, so many of us are so small. We're focused on our communities. Like the idea of stepping back to work on the brand, it feels daunting, but it really doesn't have to be. It can be one little piece at a time.
All right. This is fantastic. So tell us, Kevin, where can we get the book? Where can we connect with you? I know you're on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. So fundablefindable.org has all the book formats. So it is here in June as we record this, and we're actually about to release the audiobook. And then we're going to be releasing a new way to buy it through print in case you don't want to buy on Amazon. But yeah, it's on Amazon. You can buy it online at Barnes & Noble and all the other sources. And there's a few ebook versions. So fundablefindable.org. Our organization is mightyally.org. And then, I write for free on LinkedIn every day and then have a Substack newsletter that's free. We, as a nonprofit ourselves, our whole initiative around field building means that we learn all this stuff with our clients, but we want to scale the expertise. We don't just want people who pay us to be able to access the same expertise and resources. So we're posting stuff all the time, funding lists and brand tools and things like that, just so hopefully we can build the field of brand building in this sector.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for being here. I will put all of the links in the show notes for everyone. And I really encourage you to check out the book, get the book, and follow Kevin on LinkedIn for many more insights. But thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, this was a blast. Could have talked for hours.
wanted to say thank you for tuning into my show and for listening all the way to the end. If you really enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app, and you'll get new episodes downloaded as soon as they come out. I would love if you left me a rating or a review, because this tells other people that my podcast is worth listening to. And then me and my guests can reach even more earbuds and create even more impact. So that's pretty much it. I'll be back soon with a brand new episode. But until then, you can find me on Instagram at JuliaCampbell77. Keep changing the world, you nonprofit unicorn.